enough Trump supporters out there to scare pretty much any reasonable person watching this Republican primary, but we've got bad news for you. Depending on how you poll them, there might actually be even more than you think because of how embarrassed they are in certain contexts to admit that they like Donald Trump. Just over 38% of people who answered via a web form, a particular poll that we're going to talk about here, said that they supported Trump, compared to 32% of their peers who spoke to a call center employee, a 6 percentage point gap. But that gap among college-educated respondents widened to 9 percentage points. So you're seeing there that when you are anonymously registering your support versus talking to an actual human and having to tell a person you support him, there's a big gap. I mean, there we're talking about like 18, 20% more support for an anonymity. And for people who are particularly educated, or at least theoretically should be educated, the effect is 50% stronger. And so there's a lot of different areas where this sort of social desirability, not wanting to look like a moron or a bigot, will cause people to answer surveys one way or another. But perhaps never before in politics have we had as good of a case for why this might be masking the support that a candidate is getting. And Donald Trump is a great example of someone who appeals to particularly extreme ideologues, people who previously maybe hadn't been involved in politics but have extreme views on some things like race or religion, but at the same time don't want people necessarily to know about it because it's fairly obvious to everyone that this guy is a complete and total moron.
So according to the people who did this poll and then the ensuing articles about it, so for blue-collar workers, it might not be embarrassing at all to say that they like Donald Trump within their community and their context.
To people like them.
Right. And so that happens to be blue-collar workers that are obviously right-wing. There are blue-collar workers who are left-wing, and they would have a different opinion. But among the ones that are more educated, they appear to be embarrassed, because they understand. Number one, in their bubble, there's a lot more condemnation of Donald Trump. Number two, they have a little bit better sense that he doesn't know what he's talking about, but they kind of like it anyway. Yeah. So it's not true, and they have a better idea that it's not true, the things that they're saying, but it feels true. Yeah. So this is something that was mentioned in other focus groups around Donald Trump. It's also in this article. In some sense. And as you look at it, though, you got to be a little bit careful. First of all, the mode effect is fascinating by itself, okay? Before we get to the specifics of this particular poll, it's real. You get different results if you're talking to a person or if you're filling out, for example, an anonymous online poll in many different regards. One is if you're asked about whether you get along with your family, if you're satisfied with your family life. When they're talking to a person, they say, "Oh yeah, I'm totally satisfied." Yeah, on an online poll, dissatisfied. Yeah. Right now, it's not night and day. It is a percentage points that change. Like in this case, 6%. In the case of family life, it's a little different percentage, but it makes a difference. It makes a noticeable and significant difference. Yeah. Another issue that people change their answer based on whether they're talking to a real person or not is, do gays feel discrimination in real life? And when they're talking to real people, people go, yeah, I think they face discrimination. On an online poll, no, they don't. Get out of here. What's super interesting is there's 2 females in public life that get much worse ratings when they're not talking to people, when people are just doing an online poll where I guess they're being more honest about their feelings. Yeah. One is Sarah Palin. Her negatives go up. More people are against her. So that's okay. I don't know why you'd be embarrassed to say that, but unless you lived in a right-wing bubble. If you live in a right-wing bubble and people are like, oh, Sarah Palin, maligned unfairly, and you're like, yeah, totally. Yeah. And then you get an online poll, you're like, no, she's a dumbass, right? Yeah. Second one, even more interesting, Michelle Obama.
Oh, I thought you were going to say Hillary. What's the problem with Michelle Obama?
No, think about it. So when you're asked by someone, oh, Michelle Obama, I have no problems. But in the quiet of your own home, when you're filling that out without anybody talking to you about it, you're like, there's something I don't like about her. And you say no. Now, again, it's not a 100% difference, it's not a 50% difference, but it is a difference that is significant. So what do you think is the one thing that people don't like about Michelle Obama? I mean, there's nothing offensive about her in the
childhood obesity program.
Yeah, she runs a childhood obesity program. Are you pro-obesity?
I think it puts the blame on children when the major food corporations should have a lot of the blame. But she's doing what she can.
Are you one of the people who's voting against Michelle Obama in the online poll?
No, I still like her overall. I just don't like that particular policy.
I think you might be alone in your concerns about it.
Perhaps, yeah.
Other people might have different concerns. So now back to this. Now, to be fair here, there's one other factor that's very, very important. So they also, when they're doing the live interview polls, they are more likely to be talking to likely voters. So then that really confuses the issue, because likely voters are a better indication of who's going to show up and vote.
Yeah.
So if you're talking to more likely voters in one poll as opposed to the other, well, that one is going to be more reliable on average, and we've seen that hold in the elections. So now you've got two different factors involved in the polling, and one is very important. So the moat effect is real, and then when they test it out with Donald Trump, it's also real.
Yeah.
We just don't know how big a factor it is as compared to the likely voters that are being considered in the live polling.
Yeah, and will it be enough to swing either Republican or either some of the primaries for Trump, or maybe overall if he becomes the nominee, the actual election? And when people go into the actual booth to vote, which end of that will they be on? I mean, they're still somewhat embarrassed to not just to indicate support, but to actually vote for a person they might be affected by the sort of slight shame that they feel, or their understanding that there's something a little bit wrong with supporting him, or maybe they will feel totally free to express how they actually feel. And there's two other examples of this, just because I also find the effect very interesting. It's not the exact same thing, but this could affect support for a female politician, because some people will register support for a group that they feel they should support but don't. The same thing has happened to black politicians for a very long time in terms of in primaries, but especially in the difference between exit polling and the actual results. People will go out and after they voted, and they will indicate that they voted for the black candidate because they're talking to a person and they feel like they should say that. But then it turns out, and this has historically been the case up until very recently, that something like 8% fewer actually voted for the candidate they said that they voted for. And then also, which is I think very interesting, when you ask people how religious they are, how often they go to church, versus actually going and counting the cars at churches and indicating measurement by actual people being there, there's huge swings in the numbers. So people love to say
that last
certain
one. Of course. Oh, yeah. No, I believe totally. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Little word
Love
of God.
church.
I go to church all the time.
Yeah, I hate my couch, especially on the weekend when it's like nice and warm. I hate my couch. I go to church.
NFL, not interested. Okay, now one last thing that's very, very important for this particular election. In Iowa, it's the first event, obviously. You've got the primaries coming up in New Hampshire after that, but Iowa is a caucus. So in a caucus, what you do is you go and actually talk to your neighbors and try to convince them. Then you go and vote in secret. So if you're embarrassed to tell people on the phone that you're for Donald Trump, are you going to go tell your neighbors and actually argue in favor of it? Well, I suppose that's less likely, given that we know that this is a phenomenon that exists for Donald Trump. So that might hurt him in the argument phase. We don't know if it'll hurt him when they finally get into that ballot box and they're like, yeah, I know I said that stuff to Bob, but I'm voting for Donald.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh, but it might hurt him just because they weren't doing the persuading that you're supposed to do in a caucus. Like if you're not telling your friends or your neighbors or Randy Gonzalez about the candidate you support, then they are not then going to be affected and go in and vote for him.
And right now,
and Iowa's important.
And by the way, right now, according to polling, Ted Cruz is up by 9 points in Iowa against Donald Trump. But if you take this into account, Donald Trump might be leading.
Yeah.
So it is a big swing.
Isn't that amazing that they're too embarrassed to admit that they support Donald Trump, but they're okay with admitting that they support a warmongering, theocratic, half-melted lump of wax? Like they're totally fine with that, not embarrassed at all. But Trump, I mean, come on, I'm reasonable.
Yeah, Ted Cruz is arguably worse than Donald Trump.
Yeah.
Talking about carpet bombing. He's actually passed legislation to ban Muslims from the country. It's not theoretical. I don't mean passed it, it's passed Congress, but that he introduced it, so it's much more real. There's a lot of things that you should be massively embarrassed to support Ted Cruz on.
Yeah.
But it hasn't had the same media attention. So they feel like Ted Cruz, he's a senator. That's fine. I'm not embarrassed about that.
Yeah.
You know, he has the same hateful opinions, but less embarrassing.